Hello, everyone. Today we're going to do an interview with Dr. Michelle LaMasa-Dawson, who is someone I've known for, I think, 10, 12 years now. I went out to California and did a workshop, Recall Healing Level 1, because I just couldn't stand it anymore. I wanted Gilbert to come to Cleveland. That didn't happen till later, but so I met Michelle. I don't remember. I think that was maybe when I was pregnant with my daughter or my son. I know I was very pregnant. I don't remember. So I'd love to hear you just maybe introduce yourself a little bit. You have a PhD in recall healing, and maybe you want to just tell us about your journey there a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. I have a PhD. My PhD is in mind-body medicine, and I focused my dissertation work and my studies in recall healing. I saw so much value. I saw people really transforming right before my eyes, and that for me was enough. I thought I wanted to be have a PhD in psychology, so I started that process. I have a degree in social work and master's degree in religious studies. I was proving my existence for a really long time.
Right.
And then I jumped into the psychology degree, and I thought, oh, it's great stuff, and learned a lot, but it keeps it here. So when I took health psychology and biopsychology, that made a lot more sense to me about the specificity of stress and stress specific. And at the same time, my aunt was going through a breast cancer, and my cousin's husband is an osteopath. And so he met up with Gilbert at a workshop, Gilbert Renault, and met up with him at a German New Medicine workshop, which was amazing. Gilbert invited him to his home, and long story, he came to San Diego, and that started the whole process of me learning recall healing. And the moment I stepped foot in that classroom, I wanted to be gum on Gilbert's shoe. It was just, oh my gosh, I wanted to know everything that I could. And then when I was looking for a PhD program, the mind-body medicine program was so beautiful, and it was designed after the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C., where they had done all kinds of studies to show the efficacy of using mind-body skills to help a person through trauma, through sickness, through all of these things. So that was the perfect foundation for me to use recall healing as, my dissertation. I was super surprised, though, when I went to school and I was met with fierce opposition
Oh, of course.
because they said, where's the research? So I took it upon myself that to say there is, when you have enough anecdotal evidence, it becomes true evidence. And so I started collecting that and using that for my own way to bring forth recall healing.
Let's just explain a little bit more the kind of history, recall healing, where that comes from, because I think that's not necessarily language that people know what that is. So
Sure, absolutely. So recall healing is founded in the work of German New Medicine by Dr. Hammer, and he really gave us this beautiful science. And every disease, every illness follows these lines. That he said that there's 5 laws, and he went into the specific and even how we form in our mother's womb, as to how disease process can begin and carry through, and that our body has the perfect understanding of how to heal itself. And that is just so beautiful. Dr. Sabah was a student, and so powerful. Dr. Sabah was a student of Dr. Hammer, and he added he has Jewish background, and he recently passed away. Actually, in August, he recently passed away, and he brought to us another layer of understanding. He knew the work of Anne Ansel and Schutzenberger, and also Dr. Mark Frichet, who used timeline and having these aspects of Oh, awesome. And the ancestor syndrome. And so when Anne Anselin Schutzenberger would work with a person, she would do their genogram, and she began to see that there was these patterns that happened from above based on our birth order number, based on our name, and she called them invisible loyalties. So recall healing, Gilbert has taken that to the next level. He was a student of Dr. Sabah, and he had years of experience. He lived a spirituality. He became a naturopath. He was a cook. He was a dancer. And so he had all these wonderful experiences. And then he brought all of that and then his own investigation to add to what he calls recall healing. And so that's sort of the fast history of recall healing.
Okay. So it's a lot of the concepts that come out of the German New Medicine that have been added with the additional practitioners and teachers. So it's really essentially how I'm going to put that language in my experience of the German New Medicine, which I'll just share my background in that. I first learned about when I was in France in 1996. Dr. Hammer, having been from Germany, there was a lot more awareness of that in like a holistic, and I was actually at a meditation ashram at the time when somebody told me. So obviously in that environment, people were going to be more aware of Dr. Hammer's work, and they had explained to me, because of my chronic skin issue, that skin has to do with a conflict of separation. We can talk more about that later. So I was, of course, immediately fascinated because my whole life has been really chasing the ancestor syndrome. Like, why did my mom's mom die when she was 8, and what impact did that have on my mother emotionally? And I was thinking about this and thinking about this and thinking about this. And then, my mother proceeded to become ill when I was 15, and my brother is now in the process of passing of that very same illness. And hence the skin flare that I mentioned earlier before we got live. Just, so much that's coming through the layers. I was always looking for that. So, learned about the German New Medicine, and then randomly met one of the people in Canada that knew Dr. Hammer. This was probably in like 99, 2000, when I was driving up to Toronto all the time. And this woman was connected to him, and I got all of his materials through her, and, was really studying them on my own. And then just using it as I could. And then, as I mentioned, doing the recall healing workshops. I brought Gilbert here when my daughter was 3 weeks old. So I must have been pregnant with my son when I saw you, because clearly that wasn't just, I don't think that was like 6 months apart, but maybe it was, I don't remember. So I just find this work so incredibly important in terms of how we work to understand ourselves, and I'm loving this global community that's developing of practitioners that come from various different backgrounds that can bring in the 5 biological laws and, the new biology or the German New Medicine. Like, we really need to, as a global society, understand this to stop killing. Because when we go and think that there's bad biology, this organism's good, this organism's bad, you've got an infection, we have to obliterate all this without understanding the process of life. I think we're really going to just continually be in trouble. And that level of holism, that work that you and I are doing by including the German New Medicine, the new biology, recall healing, it's so different than just a course that's teaching mind-body medicine. Because like everybody knows there's a relation, they say, I don't even say relationship anymore, because it's the same thing. There's no difference between the mind and the body. Like, you can't.
It's as if the head were not connected to the body at all. It never made sense to me. That it just never made sense to me. But exactly, that is the truth. And I just gave a presentation this week on mold, microbes, and metals. And when you're coming from that perspective of, oh, that's bad and it needs to be eradicated completely, then you don't have an understanding that, look at in nature, fungus takes away the decay, and it helps to bring in new life. Well, our body is no different from that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about a little bit of some of the kind of key concepts that, my staff and I are always talking about whenever something happens with one of us or one of them. Okay, what happened? What's going on? And I like explain to them. Actually, my one employee, we just had a kind of a big issue actually this week that she just gave me permission to share, but without getting into too many details, she was essentially becoming incredibly anxious about some higher issues in the organization, in the business, that weren't really her responsibility to resolve or figure out, but she thought that they were. Like there was like a misunderstanding, and she's trying to fix all these huge problems, and she's worrying about it and anxious about it. And then subconsciously she was actually terrified for her livelihood. Like, what would she do if the business exploded? Like she had gotten herself that worked up unconsciously over the course of a couple of weeks. So when there was this one little thing that I was asking her to do that she was just like freaking out about, and it was the type of thing that she had done like for the last 4 years that she's worked for us. And I was like, what's going on? So we finally sat down and we like talked about it and hashed it out. It was a difficult conversation because, she was feeling like she wasn't being heard by me. And I'm like, something here is not adding up. So we figured out that she was worrying about all these things, and that things that other people had said and conclusions that she had come to, et cetera, et cetera. It was a big maelstrom of stuff. We figured it out. Go home. The next day we come in, she's like, oh my God, I got that like torticollis thing I had like when my son was born. So, I mean, I'd love to hear what your interpretation is of the right shoulder versus the left shoulder, which was the baby. The right shoulder, I'm like, it's all work, but it was, she had gone into a terror state subconsciously. And then when she resolved it and that consciousness came back into this, this burden, this responsibility, that she was carrying, it all just.
Isn't it fascinating how our body does work and holds on to these emotions for us until we can resolve them? And so I'll just share a little bit about that, these laws that Dr. Hammer created, that he says that first, that we're like a rocket. We're psyche, automatic brain, and body. And that everything that we process, from our psyche, but the bottom line is the way that we deal with our daily problems. That's all based on the way we're raised, our culture, how we're raised. All of that comes into play. And so we don't see reality as reality because it's from our filters of growing up and all of these aspects. And so the automatic brain is responsible to keep us alive from moment to moment. So something like this in nature is now considered a threat to our existence. So the automatic brain will pull it out of the psyche, download it into the right shoulder in this particular case, where the right shoulder for a right-handed person would feel where a person might feel stuck or devalued, or that they're carrying this. And so muscles are about powerlessness, whereas bones are more about feeling super devalued. But it's a combination in that moment. And so the brain sends a message to the shoulder to hold on. And so in the meantime, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you're ruminating about your problem, you're really spinning, your digestion shuts down, you have cold extremities. It's complete sympathetic overdrive. And then having this beautiful conversation and really hashing it out, the brain says, oh, you understand, I feel heard, and now I can go into the recovery phase. And that's when the pain would hurt or happen in the new mesodermic tissue.
And what did you say about muscles? If bones are more feeling devalued, muscles are more what?
Muscles are about feeling powerless, too much power, not enough power. It's the same thing for the brain.
But same thing for the brain. What do you mean?
So it means that like if a person doesn't have enough power, Okay. Or if they overpower someone and then they feel badly about that, it's the same. So if you don't have enough of something, or if you have too much of something, for the brain, there's no difference at all. And it will manifest, the way it is. If we're not living in alignment, that's really the bottom line.
Yeah.
If there's something that's really bothering us, like a pebble in our shoe, that's that we sort of ignore, or we try to brush it under the carpet to keep going, the brain will use that to help us to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So when you said the brain, I wasn't clear if you were talking about the conflicts when people actually have lesions or issues in the brain, or if you're talking about the automatic brain, the automatic brain that's programming and having what's going in, I always think of the Carl Jung quote, what does not come back to my awareness comes back as destiny, because if you're aware, it doesn't need to go into the physical body. You don't need to take it on, and the subconscious part of your psyche isn't going to be kind of packaging that and storing it in the tissues. It's just part of your awareness, and then it doesn't become as big of, or maybe not at all, an illness. Like you almost don't have an illness because you've kept it at that level.
Absolutely. So we say when we give it issue, it doesn't have to go into the tissues.
Yeah.
But all of us, we struggle for certain things, but the more that we talk about it and process it and really do try to find some resolution about those kinds of things, it's not as serious. It doesn't ever have to turn into something life-threatening, or.
Well, I'd love to talk about that also in the context of myocardial infarction, heart attacks that have to do with the conflict of territory, literally, figuratively, symbolically. I actually had a patient once who had, I think, 3 heart attacks, and we, sat down and talked about what had been going on in his life, and it was very clear, but then what he wasn't really clear about was, well, now, why would I want to resolve my issues if it's going to give me a heart attack, right?
And that's so tricky. That really is the trickiest thing, because
the heart attack is the healing crisis. I should just clarify in this circumstance.
It is. The heart attack is the healing crisis. And so what I try to help people to understand is that the bigger the conflict, okay, right, and that if you don't process it, the brain will hold on to that, and that will be the bigger the repair. And Dr. Hammer said that the recovery process is equal to the height of the stress itself.
Exactly.
So when you lose territory, and this could be, so many people have, they retire and then their brain, and so they've been in this stress for a very long time. And so anytime that this loss of territory lasts longer than 2 to 3 months, that can equal a myocardial infarct later. Mm-hmm. And so, or when a person feels super overwhelmed, and then, with that, so many variables. So, hormonally active, not having gone through menopause yet, and these kinds of things. All of these are variables that do play a role in how we heal, what's going on in our body. And so we look at all of these little details to make sure that we're on the right track.
So what you're really speaking to, I think, and let me just confirm that I understand and that the audience here understands, you're saying that it's not just about the intensity of the conflict. It's definitely the severity will reflect the intensity of the original conflict in terms of the healing phase and what happens. But what you're also saying is that all of the other variables that are your health, that determine your health, what we at Options would call your terrain or your metabolic health, that's also going to determine the severity and the depth to which and the breadth to which the symptoms are going to be. So it's really both and once again, they can't be separated because it's really all one thing. And that actually reminds me of something I wanted to say when you were talking about the ancestor syndrome and Selin Schulzenberger. Thank God I have her book here so I can pronounce her name properly. But the whole thing about observing that people are the result of their ancestors. You said it better than I did, but the way that I think of it is, it's not even just like they're playing out these invisible loyalties. It's like we're all really a compilation of the entirety of the past of all of our ancestors. So it's like that's what built us, and it really all came through the origin of consciousness, and it's consciousness, playing with this, moving energy that we think of as a physical world. And that's how it's not separate, is that it's
Yes,
just
exactly.
it's a historical complex of involuted consciousness communicating with itself. And and it's all infinitely connected. So that's why we get these signs. We say, oh, the universe is showing me this, or we see these synchronicities that Carl Jung started, he coined that word and started pointing out that phenomenon. And then now, as consciousness continues to raise in society globally, people are more and more leaning into and accepting these concepts as a way to use in your day-to-day life to help you understand yourself. And that's what really gets me like so excited about this whole process. And it's fascinating, but it's just also so incredibly wonderful to have a tool to be able to understand yourself and then to help other people understand themselves.
Absolutely. And even the example that you gave with your employee that is working with you, that it shows like all that she had experienced in her life. When the emotion doesn't fit the experience, you know that there's something much bigger at work. And so what you said, about she's been doing this for the last 4 years. Why now all of a sudden? So she may have been in the perfect time space intersection, and that it represents an anniversary syndrome, where something like this, where she felt stuck and devalued in the past, is now showing up again in this moment to help her to understand, hey, you haven't dealt with all these other things. So this is an invitation for you to dive in. And so that is, so
great about you pointing that out. Her son just turned 2. Like literally like a week ago.
So,
and that was when she had the whole thing with the left shoulder, and it was like she was feeling, similar parallels, but it was more in relationship to
her child, which would be left side. And
right.
And then probably, and now if it's 2 years later, there's probably some 2-year program that was with mom, and the shoulders are what gets stuck when we go through the birth canal. So that's why we say that, how did you feel stuck? How did you feel devalued? Where have you felt powerless to sort of move forward and do what you need to do? So it's really, and it never happens outside, the function of our body. It doesn't go against common sense. Like, oh, it makes sense that our body does this. We don't think of it like that. I've had so many clients say, well, that's so easy. It can't be that. That's way too easy. And so, I had one guy that I was working with that had a depression for years and years and years, finally started feeling better. And he said, and I heard him at a workshop tell somebody, they said, well, what do you attribute that to? Not the work that he had just, been doing on this, it's really about the stress of the daily life. He says, oh, I got my teeth done. I got all my teeth redone. It's like, what? Yeah, zero. Like it was too easy. And people look for these complicated, ideas of why, but it's really, bottom line, just never goes against biology.
Yeah. And I think a big part of what you're talking about too is this indoctrination that there are no answers without a scientific process. And I just want to remind our audience that before there was science, there was natural science. And before there was natural science, there was natural philosophy. And before there was natural philosophy, there was philosophy. And before there was philosophy, there were mystics. And before there were mystics, there were yogis. We were just, it's this evolution of consciousness and the way that we learned and started to understand things. And it largely, what also gets forgotten is our experience. Like we, in this in this rigidity around the importance of science, we've forgotten that science really also used to include the empirical method of you go through an experience and then you know something is true. Everybody
Absolutely.
does that, whether you're,
Yes.
the head of the Cleveland Clinic, cardiology department, or whether you're you or me, or whether you're just Joe Schmo walking down the street. We all make conclusions based on our experiences. So it's a
Absolutely.
method and a way of knowing as much as, going within and reflecting internally, as well as having a process that's very delineated to mark what's happening in a population when they do a certain thing. But the scientific method, when it comes to these kinds of things, is really not cut out for assessing this. And I really think we're at a point in time where we're needing to value all of those ways of knowing, of collating knowledge, and that it's okay. And I'm like, let's righteously take it back instead of having to feel like we have to prove ourselves, because everybody's
Well,
doing it anyway.
so true. And what has been neglected and forgotten for so many years is that we do have internal wisdom. We are the captain of our own life, and we don't need a doctor to tell us or to say this is what you're experiencing. That might lead the way to help us to understand that there's certain things that we haven't named and that we are secretly suffering in our life, but we have internal wisdom of what is best for us.
Yeah, we're infinitely knowing beings. And I tell all my patients, I do truly hope that you will go within and feel into the recesses of your heart and find what is the right answer for you, because I can't tell you what to do. And this doctor can't tell you what to do. And it's dangerous for your family or your spouse or your children to be telling you what to do. And I tell people, I really believe that that's the first sign of destroying or nullifying your own immune function. Because if you're not listening to your highest self, you're not developed enough to be able to listen to what your inner being is saying, then you have no immunity. Your immunity is what differentiates self from other. So if you're not listening to the self or know who that self is, what is the immune system? It's kind of null and void. But I've seen a lot of cancer patients in my day tank because they're not strong enough in themselves to really feel through what they themselves want to do, or they make decisions out of fear or because someone else is telling them what to do. And I see it.
The
Yeah,
pressure
I
that they get is
see it as the
so
first danger now. So
overwhelmed.
I really just kind of ask people to really start leaning in. And of course, dealing with the anxiety of having a potentially terminal disease is one of the really key things too. So let's just take a little bit more time here. I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about cancer, and just maybe the overarching difference between how some, lesions might get misdiagnosed, or is that something you could speak to?
So there are two phases of every disease and every illness. And so when the conflict is quite big, then this can be part of the disease process. And sometimes when a diagnosis comes through in that moment, it can be, a cancerous diagnosis, but it's really just following this process of these two phases. And so when a person doesn't have that understanding, then that can cause all kinds of other problems and fear. And so to take whatever is the assessment and to bring it in and just say, okay, wait a minute. If I have something going on, instead of focusing on that specific thing and changing it to why is this the best solution for me in this moment? What is this telling me? Then, and I go to work on some of the things that I'm not at peace about in my life. my body will naturally heal itself with the different bacteria and microbes and the things that are in our body to help us. And of course, you know, that having the doctor's guidance, having your guidance to keep that in balance, because we know that there can be overgrowth of certain things, and that doesn't make it easy to go through that process. But even though sometimes something is said to be like a cancer, it's not. And with Dr. Hammer, he said that so often people diagnosed with a brain tumor, it's actually part of the recovery phase that of a Hammer focus and repair, that it's not at all a brain tumor. And so we have to pay attention to all of that. And one, if you have the understanding that your body is not malfunctioning, and because we always think, oh, we hear all the time, you got to fight it, you got to kill it. I worked with a guy who had a pancreatic cancer, and he would do imagery, and he said, oh yes, I saw the bombs just going. So when we reframed it to help him to understand that tissue is your tissue, it's made of your skin, your tissue, and that your body is helping you deal with the disgust that you feel about your family, and you know, the fight that you've had with your dad, and all of this. And he was like, oh my gosh, it gave him a completely different understanding. I don't know if that helps, if that actually answered the question, but I hope that it's on.
Well, I think you know, you were trying to speak about it so globally in relationship to kind of any body part and any area, that it sounds probably vague for people, but if I could just summarize it, it's that whole rocket you were talking about. And
Yes.
how when you have a long-standing conflict that's constantly coming through the psyche into the automatic brain, that the tissue, wherever it may be, you know, breast or prostate or brain itself, thyroid, like the symbolism of the conflict will determine where that pathologic lesional change in the tissue is going to show up. And that sometimes it shows up during the active conflict, and sometimes it shows up after the resolution of the conflict. So those are the two.
That's correct. Yeah. And that depends upon how we form in our mother's womb and the tissue. So vital things, you know, our vital organs, our old brain kinds of, you know, just about survival and reproduction, the tissue is going to behave in one way. And then if it's more of the relational things and other, you know, connection and territory and those kinds of aspects, you know, these are more new brain kinds of activities, and the tissue will behave in a different way. So that it can be a little bit confusing in that way, but always to know that it's never by mistake. It's always about how we feel about a particular conflict. And that will be the download. If it's so overwhelming, if it's so big, the brain will then download it into the body according to how a person feels in that moment. And that will give them a little bit of time in that moment to begin to find a solution to their problem.
So just to reiterate, I know the chart that Dr. Hammer created has the ectoderm and the mesoderm and the endoderm, and then I haven't looked at it in quite some time. But
all mesodermic too. Yes. Also all of that endodermic, old mesodermic, new mesodermic, and then ectodermic tissue. Yeah. And so how we form in our mother's womb and the tissues related to that, and how we feel about the conflict, these are the law of two phases. So if you're in conflict and, you know, it's old brain or, you know, a vital kind of issue, and really in nature, vital means I can't let it go. It's so hard. It's unforgivable. It's just, I just cannot. This person doesn't deserve my forgiveness. That's kind of issue.
That's deep.
It is. And so that's why, you know, like, of course, the brain would say, this is something so big that And in that moment, when you have something so big, the brain sends a message to grow the tissue, like a turbo function, to give you what you need in order to help you with this problem.
And it's all just like so incredibly fascinating. And I just want to support people learning how to use their body as a tool. You know, your body's really like this cosmic antenna that helps you read the field of where you are and how your soul has come through all these lineages to be in this current place. That's like the end result of all of that. This is your work. Like you're here because of your own history. There's no changing it. And the ability of this kind of work to allow a person to take responsibility for themselves and be accountable to self, I think it's just so incredibly beautiful. So why don't we just maybe spend a minute and talk about like the future? So we were mentioning earlier about how great it is that there's more and more people that are learning this work. I know this work is huge in Europe. You mentioned recently doing a workshop with over 700 people, and that, you know, in the future, we both would love to see this kind of work, this kind of awareness in medicine grow in the United States. So I thought it would be great that both Dr. LaMasa and I would both share like our intention. And if people are interested, they can reach out to us individually to our different websites, and we'll give that information. But you're doing more teaching and training of folks in this method, as well as, you know, working with people in groups, correct? Do you want to say anything more about that?
Sure. So I give workshops pretty regularly. About every couple of months, I'm giving workshops. And so that's a really nice way to jump in. It's like having 5 sessions in one workshop. You even mentioned, you know, going there and just, so now we do most of the workshops online. Just, you know, COVID changed a lot of different things. And so it's about energy, not proximity. And so I still work with people, but not as much. And I have practitioners that work with me. I supervise them. And so that part is growing. And then next September, I'm starting an institute in the United States for people that are interested in wanting to deepen their understanding about how to work with people. We do need practitioners. People, you know, I mean, the reality is there are sick people in this world, and they need help. And so it's really wonderful that in Europe, and my theory about that is that in Europe, they've lived long histories of lots and lots of trauma. So they really live closer to the land and closer to the understanding. Whereas in the United States, we're starting to see a lot more, you know, things happen here, but we're like teenagers at some level where we're wise in our own eyes. And so it hasn't really taken, you know, hold yet, but it's really starting to gain a lot of interest, and it just makes sense. And so these tools are practical, and so I want to teach them to anybody who would like to learn about them.
Yeah, awesome. And I myself am going to start working more with folks in groups and trying to just create a container for people to be able to learn from each other's experiences, as well as the themes and the patterns that, you know, we can share. So all that's in development and things that we're going to be working on. And if you have a particular interest in that, please just reach out to us. You want to just say the name of your website too?
My website is soultreetransformations with an S.com.
soultreetransformations.com. Awesome.
Yes, like SOUL, the soul, and then
Oh, yeah.
tree, from the root to the fruit and everything in between.
Well, this has been really great, and I hope we get to do this again sometime soon, and we can go a little bit even deeper. So thank you so much for being willing to be my guest.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, and it's great that you're doing this work, and any way that we can team up, I think that just brings it to the next level. And so it's an honor. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.